Okay, so last week I was saying I tried out my cell phone and I was able to get correction data, and it I don't know if I said or not, but I could get it through the Wi-Fi, and I thought I really should check it through the cell phone network. So I turned off one of my phone, turned off the Wi-Fi, turned on the cell modem stuff, and it still appears to work. And just sitting there in the house, I was also amazed because with the robot inside my front door against a metal entry door, and I've got stucco on my house, I've got metal grid in all my walls. But I was sitting there, and the thing, I'd turn on the cell phone correction data and it would give me a float solution. I sat there for a while playing around. I realized I had a fixed solution sitting inside of my house, and that's a very rare occurrence to see that. So obviously the data coming through was good enough to give me a decent location on that. So I was thinking I should go out and drive around, but I haven't done that. And I did decide that since I was playing with it, I was wondering, yeah, does the robot still work? So I can just, while it's sitting on the floor there in front of my door, I can just say, turn on the switch on the robot and turn on my remote control. And I can prove with the steering, I can control the steering, and I can drive it forwards and backwards a few inches, and that proves it all works. So I did drag it out in the yard and drove it up and down the sidewalk a couple of times. And so I know that's working. So speaking of next steps, so one of the next steps I have to do is take my mainline laptop, because I poured rum in my other mainline laptop and I had to switch to my robot laptop. So I've taken my mainline laptop, which is my robot laptop. I'd have to put that connect. I've got two USB cables to plug in on the robot and just start up the launch file. And I have to prove that that all still starts up all the correct drivers and logs to my bag file. And if I get the ambition, I could take it outside and drive it around and verify all the, you know, the positions, everything come back seem to be adequate. And then I guess the next thing after that, I really need to go back and do this steering calibration that everybody keeps agonizing over. So I was trying to think a reasonable way to do that. And I was, number one, I don't want to have to take a laptop outside and sit in the sun and try to type in commands and try to read the screen and do all this kind of stuff. So I keep thinking about how do I get how can I do this without using the laptop screen? So here's my remote control box. Here's my remote control box, and it's got along the top here, it's got these three switches. Let's see, it's got this switch is the one that's, if it's down, it's in manual. If I flip it to the up position, that's the autonomous mode. So in the manual position with it down, it's using one of the two joysticks. We'll call it this one. This one, so forward and backward is the speed, and the left and right is the steering. And that's the way it's always worked. And I've got these two extra switches on here. There's a toggle switch here. This one's a 3-position toggle switch. So that gives me, by the time that gets all the way to the robot, that gives me three different, I can tell from there which position it's in. So that gives me three options there. Then the other switch over here is a momentary switch. So you move it one way or the other, and then when you release it, it comes back. So I can use that like push buttons. There are actually push buttons on here, but they're not wired up because I didn't have enough input pins to hook them up. But the one that's momentary, I can treat that as push buttons, and I can treat this as just three different options to hook up to the thing. And other than that, I thought, trying to figure out how can I use those to do something useful. And I thought the first thing, if I'm going to try to calibrate the steering, I could take the 3-position switch that's a maintain switch, and I'll say if it's all the way, say, to the right, I'll have it publish a steering angle of 0. And then if I move it to the center position, just pick some number, say 10 degrees, and have it publish that, and move it all the way to the left, it can publish something like 20 degrees to 30 degrees, just so I have known values going out. So, so the robot can read that switch. And then if I go to my manual autonomous switch, in the manual mode, it just simply, number one, the beacon flashes orange, so I know what mode it's in. And if I run the joystick, I can drive it around. Now, if I flip that switch up, now the beacon starts flashing blue, say it's autonomous mode. And currently in that mode, it's supposed to be accepting commands from ROS and decoding those and then making the motors run. So what I can do instead, just for testing, I can say, if I put it in autonomous mode, I will go out and look at that 3-position switch, and I'll send that value to my RC servo. So the whole point is I have to get the scaling in between those set up correctly. But if I put it in, say, 0, angle of 0 and put it in autonomous mode, then the steering should go straight and sit there. And if I move it to the, say, the center position, which let's say I've got that programmed for 10 degrees, that means my wheel should turn 10 degrees, whichever direction that is programmed to be. So then if I drive forward, it should drive in a circle based on that steering. And I was also thinking that, well, when I switch it in this autonomous mode, I want to be able to program what steering angle to load into it, and then it has to drive forward. So I thought, well, it could just, as soon as I put it in autonomous mode, it could just start driving forward at some arbitrary speed. And then the more I think about it, there's a interesting thing here that if you take the standard command velocity, which has forward velocity and rotational velocity, well, those two interact. So depending on what speed you're going, you're going to get a different amount of, basically your vehicle is going to act differently depending on the speed you're going. But if you take that converter out of the TEB planner, they've got an extra little node you can run that will take standard command velocity and convert it. They convert it directly to an Ackermann command. But the whole concept is you want to take the forward velocity and rotational velocity and convert that into forward velocity and steering angle. So they've got like two lines of code there that do that. And once you get into steering angle, you don't care about the speed anymore. It's not dependent. The vehicle is not dependent on the speed. And consider if you go out in your yard on your lawn tractor and you're out mowing and you say you're going straight and then just turn the steering, say 50% to the left, and then step on your foot pedal. So the thing starts moving forward slowly, you're going to drive in a circle, and you can speed up, you're still going to drive in that same circle. So no matter what speed you're driving, just based on where the steering is set, that will automatically take care of that. Whereas the rotational velocity will not. You got to set your speed and make sure you maintain that speed in order for it to drive on the circle you're telling it. So this is actually a big advantage because now we can just ignore the speed of the vehicle. And that's good because right now, the way mine is set up, I don't have good control over my main drive motor in autonomous mode. If I say drive at 0.5 meters per second, I could do one of two things. I can either just say set the power driver to 50%, which is what the joystick is doing. My joystick simply, as I move it forward and backwards, it just picks a 0 to 100% power level to send to the motor, and that's for a human driving it. That's very drivable. But when I switch over to autonomous mode, I can take the velocity from ROS, and if it says 0.5 meters per second, I do have the code put in there to control the speed of the motor, but I never got that to work well enough to trust it. So the other thing I thought of, what I could just say and put in a preset speed or a preset amount of power, and that it doesn't really matter how fast it's going because the whole thing is dependent on what the steering angle is set at. So that would work out. But the more I thought about it, I thought I could just take, in autonomous mode, I'll still grab the joystick and use that to control the forward and backward speed. So in that mode, let's say I'm running the pure pursuit follower, it's going to control the steering back and forth, and then the speed is actually come from the joystick. So I can, if I want, I just let go of the joystick, it'll come to a stop, and then as I push the joystick some amount forward, it'll start driving at whatever speed that is. So I can run the speed up and down while the thing's driving. So I think that will work out fairly well too. So it's just a matter of going into my code that I've got right now and just modifying it slightly so it knows where to get these commands, and so everybody's happy. Then the other thing I thought of, besides, say I got the 3-position switch, and for right now to calibrate the steering, I'll just set it to say move the switch to the center position. It's going to turn the wheels, whatever I got programmed in there, and then drive the thing forward so it drives in a circle a couple of times, and then come to a stop, and then move it to the greater angle and drive in a circle a couple of times. Then when I'm all done, I can say shut the thing down and go in the house and analyze the bag file, because from the bag file I can see that I told it to turn the steering 10 degrees, and then when I'm driving, I can take the recovered forward, or the recovered velocity and the recovered rotational velocity off my odometry, or I can get both of those off my GPS, or I can get my rotational velocity off my IMU. So anyway, I can recover all that stuff to find out what the vehicle's really doing. So I've got 3 different ways to figure out how that's working. So then what I do is I say, if I told it to turn at 10 degrees, which has various implications down the line, I can go back and look at the data coming out of the bag file and say, um, what angle is it really turning? And if they're not the same, then I just have to run my scale factor up or down until those two match. And the fact that going all the way back to where I started with, I said the TEB planner has that converter that takes forward velocity and rotational velocity. It converts that into forward velocity and steering angle. If I apply that again to what's coming back out of the vehicle, then that'll tell me at any given point how fast forward am I driving and what is the steering, what does it think the steering angle is. And that way I can compare my input steering angle in this example 10 degrees to my output steering angle. And if the two are not the same, I think I can just blatantly divide. If I just take the 10 degrees in and let's say I get 12 degrees out, I can just divide one by the other. And instead of having say a 1.0 scale factor, I'll just put in, if it comes out like a 0.89 or a 1.2, I just put that in instead of my 1.0. And I think then that will successfully calibrate my steering. So that's something I can try out. It's going to be a manual process, and it's just a matter of, I just got to figure out from my remote control, what do I need to do to get it to do that. And at any point I can flip the switch back to manual mode, and with my joystick I can drive it around anywhere I want. So that's, I'm not putting it into a condition where I'm going to have to, if anything goes wrong, I have to pick it up and drag it back, as Matt would say, the walk of shame, where you have to drag your robot back to park the thing. So anyway, that would be a good experiment to try there, because once I get that steering calibrated, which really has nothing to do with ROS other than, once it's running, then ROS is going to be sending me commands and expecting me to do that. So I have to get that calibrated. So then the other thing I thought was, I've got the say let's say I want to go out and run a path like Al is doing right now. He's got a path to find out in his yard, and he starts at his garage, and I think he types in something and says, here, publish this path. And when he does, then the thing starts up and drives across his yard to the starting point. Then it's supposed to lock onto the path and follow the path around. I thought, well, again, I don't want to have to go into a command line and do that. So on my joystick, I've got that 3-position momentary switch. So I could have a thing that says, if I move it one direction, that'll say load in a new path. So whatever the path is programmed, that will, by flipping the switch there, that will publish the path to ROS. And then the pure pursuit will see it and say, oh, I'm supposed to start moving now. So it'll start up and start trying to control and drive around. Now, at any point while that's running, if I flip my manual / auto switch back to manual mode, number one, that'll just pause the vehicle, because it's ROS is still sending out the velocity commands and the steering commands, but I'll just be ignoring those. So it's going to be looking at my joystick. So that's a convenient way to pause the thing. And then I realized that I don't have any way to stop the thing, to tell the pure pursuit to stop publishing anything. Or it's possible that if I just again publish a new path, that'll overwrite the old path, and that might reset the thing back to the beginning. Or maybe I could publish a path with nothing in it. Maybe that'll make the thing stop. So I was trying to think, how could I use that switch to do that, to basically load in a path. And so the other thing to go with that, if I really wanted to, I could look at the pure pursuit and see, is there a way, can I send it something and say, stop publishing. I don't want the thing moving anymore. You basically basically cancel the current path. So that way my 2 positions there, I can click it one way and it says publish a path, and it'll start running. And if I want to, I can click it the other way, that will say cancel the path, and it should come to a stop. And then if I get it that far, I realized that I could take my 3-position switch and have 3 different paths programmed in. So if I put it in the first position, say it's going to be the little light bulb path, like Al's running right now. So I put it in that position and then click the push button that says publish the path, and then that should automatically put a path out there, and pure pursuit says, oh, I'm supposed to be doing something. So it'll start driving around. And again, if I just use my joystick to control the forward speed, I now have complete control over it, because the steering is going to follow whatever pure pursuit's telling it, and I'm going to manually control the speed of it. So I can run it slowly around this path or run it faster, whatever I want to do on that. So I'm thinking that, you know, by putting a little bit of thought into it, I could actually make that stuff work. And as far as what was there? I think I was going to say on that. No. So once you publish the path, you know, Pure Pursuit says, "Oh, I'm supposed to be over there." And as we found out by playing with this stuff, playing with the simulator, I think Al is actually trying to do that manually on his lawn tractor. If you're not where you're supposed to be when you're supposed to start, it'll say, "Oh, I need to be halfway across the yard just to start." So it'll automatically turn in that direction and drive over there. It's not under a lot of control at that point, but it'll drive over to where it thinks that the starting path is. It'll turn to go in the right direction. Then all of a sudden it starts controlling and then should follow your path around like it's supposed to. So there might be something else there that would be a handy thing to do. Now, so I said if I want to run Pure Pursuit, I could do that. If I want to run, say, one of the real navigation packages, so if I want to run Move Base and then with or without Tab Plan or whatever, basically at that point, you know, you can go into RViz and say I want to publish a 2D navigation goal. So you click on that, click somewhere on your screen and say I want to go to this XY location, then drag the mouse in the direction you want it to be when it comes to a stop, and that will simply publish that information. The whole thing starts up and it'll drive to that thing, supposedly avoiding any obstacles if you got sensors, and then it'll come to a stop. So I thought, well, I could, if I want to run that mode, I could go back and say, take my 3-position switch, and that would say I could put in three separate goals. So I put the switch in a position, say, here's the start of the point out in the yard, and then go to my my momentary switch and click at the point and say publish that request. So as soon as I do that, that'll just publish it out on the ROS, and it will start up and drive to that point. And if everything's happy, it'll get there and it'll come to a stop, and then it'll be in idle condition again. Then I can move the switch to a different position and click the button and say publish that, and again it should start up and drive to that point. So by using those two switches, and if I get clever about, you know, how I use them, I'm thinking I could do quite a bit of testing by doing that. And at this point, I'm going to have something fairly easy, or I won't have the ambition to go out and try it. So that's kind of what I'm thinking of right now, is that I just need to look at that and take that. That's the two switches I have available, and it's not convenient to expand this remote right now without putting a bigger processor board on it. So that's probably what I would end up doing. And so I need to look into the path follower and say, can I get that thing to stop? Does it already have a way I can publish something, or, you know, either a topic or a service that says abort what you're doing? And if it doesn't have an abort function, I could add one, or possibly publishing a new path, you know, will either make it start over on at the beginning of the path, or maybe I could publish a path with nothing in it. Maybe that'll cancel it too. So I just need to look into that and see what I can do on that. And one of the big advantages of being able to control while it's running Pure Pursuit, if I can control the speed from my joystick, that's the only way to control the speed, is from the joystick. That way you're in less of a panic mode, because the thing doesn't take off at high speed and you have no idea what it's about to do. I could drive around, you know, very slowly, just inch its way around and watch the thing driving. And if it doesn't seem to be doing what it's supposed to, I can just let go of the joystick and it'll come to a stop. The steering might be doing something stupid, but I don't care, because that'd just be a convenient way. I get a convenient way to test it and prove that it's going to work before I turn it loose. And then sometime later I can say, okay, now start accepting the speed from Pure Pursuit or wherever, and just automatically drive around and do what it has to. So that's what I've been thinking about this week, is trying to come up with that stuff. Any questions on that?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot there. Congratulations on getting it out and moving it around a bit. Did you figure out what your extreme left and extreme right positions are with the, you know, in the real steering?
No, I think it's publishing enough data. You might be publishing the actual, like the RC values that I'm going to send out to the servo. And if that's coming back where I can see that on a topic, I could do it that way. So I can just run the joystick back and forth and run it to wherever I think, okay, that's what I want my maximum left to be. It might already be publishing those numbers. And if not, I could go in and create something new that just simply dumps out, is publishing the values or whatever. So that's another step that I have to do, because in order to get the scaling stuff to work, I just got to, mainly I just need to say that's a maximum, don't exceed that. And then my scaling factor between the incoming steering angle and converting that to whatever my RC values are. I have to have some major scale factor, and then I'll just put in between there, I'll just arbitrarily put a multiplier of 1.0, which is just do nothing, and then later I can adjust that number up and down just to make it, so yeah, I can expand it out like this by making the scale factor bigger. It basically just arbitrarily sets where the in limit's going to be, and I just have to make sure if I'm, let me get it's a screen here. So bang, hit this hard stop, and bang, here's my other hard stop. I just have to make sure that there's something in the code to limit that, so it can't go further than that. But just basically, if I have a scale factor of 1.0, I expect it to go out for any given angle I give it. I'm thinking it should go here. And if it's not going far enough, I increase the scale factor and make it go out a little more, or reduce the scale factor, make it go in a little more. So I think that should work. And I don't know that I need to do a lot of, knowing exactly what the angle at the hard stop is. I'm thinking that just by doing this scale factor, that should take care of that. But that I might be surprised if I go try that. So I have to see what that does.
Yeah, I don't know. I was just curious. And then the servo you're using for steering, is it that open face metal gear deal?
Yes, it is.
And so I'm assuming, a signal 0 to whatever it is, 44095, is that the range, the theoretical range that it will input?
Well, it's a 1 to 2 millisecond range, like a standard servo, and it's you just have to go figure it out. So it's, if you go look at it, it's going to be something like, and also the values on the timer are not necessarily going to be in microseconds or whatever. So there's going to be weird scaling factors in there no matter what. It's, so if I run it by what, either using my joystick or using one of those RC servo controllers and run it, say, all the way to the left, to what I consider the left, that's just going to be some arbitrary number. Run it all the way right, that's going to be some arbitrary number. And they're going to be far less than, the servo claims it'll do 300 degrees out of the box. And then there's a knob on there. You can crank that down and reduce the overall range. So I need about 180 degrees of rotation to go from one side to the other, the way it's mechanically configured right now. So it's just a matter of figuring out, when I turn it to that position, go read up the number, and it's not really, I don't think it's going to be easy or necessary to know exactly what those values have to be.
And you don't have, because the servo is taking care of it, you don't have to worry about a PID then on your steering, do you? When
No,
you say go to 20 degrees, it's going to just do its darndest to go to 20 degrees, right?
that's the plan. Yes.
Cool.
And actually on it, right now I do have that feedback wire, so I can read the voltage off the pot, and I run it through an Arduino Nano. So I'm getting another set of values off that. They're not scaled the same, but it should give me an indication of if it's doing what I want it to. Now the new ones actually have a pin built into them, so you can plug a wire in and read that with an A to D. And so you don't have to tear it apart and solder a wire on to get the new ones to work. So that's yet another thing. You can take that value and use that value for whatever you want. Mainly it's to just to verify that if you tell it to go to a certain angle and then read up the angle it says it is, if I was going to say, something slipped, but you don't, you just know the servo itself internally is setting the shaft to the angle you requested. And as Kyler pointed out years ago, he said he was doing his steering stuff, and once you're trying to do the calculations on steering, you want to use the values coming off the steering, the actual measured values of where the steering is, not the requested value. And it's just simply a matter of, if I put in a step value, say go from the centered steering to say 50% to the right, basically that's a step function, and some portion of the time that value is going to be wrong. But if you're taking the value off the servo itself or off your steering sensor, then that's the actual position it's in. So as you're doing your calculations, it's calculated based on where it actually is as opposed to where you told it to go. So that's just something to think about.
Yeah, I mean, just uh, I mean, you're further than I am thinking about, how to clear in the pure pursuit, how to clear a path that's already been published. I haven't got to the point of having to worry about that. I mean, my mode, what I'll call my mode switch on the remote control, um, it's either sort of pause, manual, or um, take input from command velocity. And I mean, in real world terms, I either get out there and it runs the whole mission, or I stop it in the middle and don't try to restart it or give it another mission. So I haven't really, just, all the way up is mode 3 and it's taking command velocity direction. If I don't like that, then it goes into manual mode and I drive it back. So I don't have that walk of shame issue. I mean, I've had the walk of shame plenty of times, but not recently.
I have it a couple of times. I think my steering fell apart because I forgot to tighten stuff. Same problem Matt had one time when he didn't tighten in the bolts on his steering, and his steering fell apart. I had that same problem where, well, actually I've had it more than once, because one time one of my control rods fell off because I didn't tighten up the bolts on it, and then other times my set screw would loosen up on my RC servo. So then I finally got smart and put some Loctite on that. And once I Loctited it, it hasn't done that to me again yet. So
Now,
yeah,
the pure
there are
pursuit,
cases.
I'm sorry, the little bit of pure pursuit path running that I have done, I mean, it's been a while since I looked at the code, but it's definitely taking in, the actual speed and calculating the angle based on, the actual speed and what rotation it needs to get to the point. So for me, I've always held in my head what it would like is a nice constant speed. And that, I mean, I've still not gotten to that point, as you know. So anyway, because when it sits still, the wheels will just go back and forth with pure pursuit, trying to figure out what angle to drive the steering motor. So it likes, a nice constant speed.
Yeah, after you mentioned that it uses the velocity, I just briefly glanced at the code, and it looks like if it's using velocity, it's pulling off the incoming odometry message. And depending whether you're supplying that from your GPS or supplying it from wheel odometry, and I know in your case, you've got a combination of, you've merged several things together to do that. But I'm thinking that, I haven't actually tried this, so I may see the problem. If I come to a stop, the steering will bang back and forth, but I'll have to address that when I see it. Now, one thing on the pure pursuit, it has no recovery behaviors built into it. So if you
Right.
just start ignoring it, it'll sit there and say, okay, I'm going to keep telling you to do this and hope you'll someday do it. If you go back to actual move base, they've got the recovery behaviors. Maybe you can turn these off, but it'll say, I'm going to, if it doesn't do what I want it to within 1 second or 2 seconds, then it starts doing all kinds of strange things. Oh, I'll try rotating to clear obstacles. Or so basically you can confuse move base immensely if you just start ignoring what it's telling you. But maybe in move base, you can just turn those off so it doesn't bite you. But I know pure pursuit, if you just start ignoring it, I don't think it's going to care. But also, I hadn't realized if you're a speed of 0 that the wheels start banging back and forth. I hadn't realized it's going to do that. So I guess I just need to go out and try it, see what kind of stuff pops up on that.
Well, good luck. That's fantastic. In the grass or on the sidewalk, wherever you're at. That's awesome.
I guess the other thing I'll have to do is figure out how to pick my points in the yard. Say if I just want to have a thing where I just, drive back and forth between 2 points and have it do the loop at each end, I still have to know what that location is. So I could just take my vehicle out. I think it's still based on, I've got an arbitrary origin at the intersection of two sidewalks where I can see, on Google Maps, I can see where it is. I know what the latitude and longitude of that is. So I put that in when I convert my GPS into my XY offset. I put that in as the origin. So if I park my vehicle right there on that spot, that thinks that's 0, 0. And so if I start up in the middle of the yard, which is not that point, and I start it up, it's going to say, oh, it's going to still use that as the reference point. So I think that will work. So if I just start up in the middle of the yard, drive it around to where I want to, I think I'm going to the side of my house and drive back and forth there. So let's go to the first point and just write down whatever the value XY value of that is, and just drive forward and say, okay, that's where I want that to be. Just write that down. And theoretically, I should be able to define a path based on that. But again, that's just more, manual playing around to get this stuff to do, just to get past that point so I can see what everything's doing.
Anything else on your list?
When I said I could drive to that point and write it down, the other thing is if I started up, drive around to that point and come to a stop, then at that point, if I go look at it later on, say, Plot Juggler, I can see that my speed has dropped to 0, and I can go out and say, what is my XY location at that point? So that'd be another way without having to write it down on the fly, try to read it off a laptop screen. That, I could just have it do that. Or another thing that you could do is have again, if you've got enough buttons on your remote control, you can just put in a marker. So you drive to that location and put the button and say, just on a topic, publish that as a marker and say, at that point, what is my XY location? Drive it to another place, hit the button to put out a marker. So there's other clever things like that you can do that, without having to go back to your laptop. Maybe the remote control would allow you to do that type of stuff too. So that's just more things to be thinking about.
Yeah, definitely. I've told myself the next time I tear open my radio control, I need to add the push button to capture like a GPS location, like as you said, put a pin in it, metaphorically speaking. Because I have a dead man push button and I have a reset push button, but I'm convinced I need at least another one for capturing a GPS location that I want for whatever reason.
You have
So,
plenty of IO pins left over to add stuff like that.
I mean, I may have a half a dozen pins. So, um,
Because I would say if you're going to start modifying stuff anyway, add switches or push buttons to add more than you think you need, because they just become programmable functions. You got a push button there. If you push it, you can decide in the code what to do with that. So, go ahead and if it's convenient, add on several things. Yeah, add several push buttons or a couple switches or whatever, just because they're there. You send the data over to your vehicle, and then the code on your vehicle decides what it should do with those. So that might be easier if you're going to start physically modifying stuff. Put in another push button. Well, maybe put 2 or 3 on there. And like mine, it's got the 2 push buttons on, but they're not wired to anything. So, at some point, if I decided really wanted to use those, I could just wire them up to the board and use them.
yeah, I think the pin availability at the moment is okay. No, I think that's wise advice to add more. As you may recall, I have created that PCB board, which is basically, an expansion board to limit how much I have to solder. And yeah, so me tearing over my radio control also involves, well, it doesn't have to, but the next iteration of my expansion board. But we'll see how that goes.
So speaking of your remote control system, you have that OLED display on your handheld device.
Mhm.
Is that are the characters big enough you can read them, and can you read it out in the sunlight?
I mean, yes and yes. I mean, it's not, you're not going to read it from 10 feet away, but, um, I've got it, in my hand, and it's certainly close enough to read in my hand. I've got the code up here. I think I got 7 7 lines. So display OLED.
I just wanted to ask first, is it readable? And if it is, then you can go on to the next step. If you want to, you could put a complete menuing system on there. So you hit a button, it goes into your menu mode, and you can scroll up and down. You got lines of text. So the menu says, select a path. The next line says, whatever you want them to be, because it's going to be completely programmable. So you can go in there and say, create a menuing system. So you have a couple of push buttons to run your cursor up and down on the menu. And when you get the one you want, you push another button that says select. So you could have, one of them might say, here's your different sub menus. So the first one says set navigation parameters. Another one says mow the hayfield. Another one says mow the front yard. And you can program it to do anything you want at that point. So, just your internal menuing system on the remote, once you come up with the correct line that you want and say execute, then you could say, maybe convert that into a number or a text string and send that to the vehicle. So it knows what you just selected off your menu. So you've got lots of extra options there since you have a display on your device.
Yeah, it's very rudimentary at the moment. So I'm smiling because your programming skills would allow that. Mine, it will take me a while to do a menuing option, but I've got 7 rows to play with at the moment, and yeah, I mean it's functional. It's definitely functional.
So all the stuff you've got right here, you could just call that a status screen. So when you go to your main menu and say select status, it would change to this kind of stuff. And then you could go back to your main screen and you had another one that says, select the paths or whatever, or say navigation. So you'd have another screen that says, do you want, here's my four paths that I got programmed in. So you select the one you want. So you can get fairly elaborate with that. And I'm sure if you go look, and like in your case, if you put in the name of your board and the fact you got an OLED and say menu code or menu functions, somebody will probably say, well, here's something I did, and give you ideas on how to make that work. But the fact you've got a full text display there, you can swap out entire screens. So depending what screen you're on, you got totally different functionality of what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And again, go search up to see what other people are doing. Maybe look on YouTube, and you watch it on YouTube. They'll show you, oh, here I do this, and I click this, and this other screen shows up. Just give you ideas what you can do, and what might be handy for that.
Yeah, so for me, I've trying to get back in the yard, trying to do my testing. I have been spending time cleaning up my radio control code and my tractor code so that my loop is, as small and tight as possible. If this happens to be the radio control code out on GitHub, but it basically gets, the status of the potentiometers. It's doing the transmit and receive of LORA messages, which has been my primary obstacle recently, is trying to get that to work along with getting serial data back and forth, because ROS serial was conflicting. Just talking about display the OLED. I also still have a function in here to print some messages over. If I were to have this connected and able to putty into it, I still have that function in there more for debugging purposes. And then I've got 4 or 5 LEDs, programmable LEDs on there, and a couple of them currently are used to display some status. So that's my main loop on my radio control. Some changes that I've made to my LoRa setup. Well, first off, I had previously been I changed libraries. There's two primary libraries. This what I'll call the standard average Arduino library called LORA.h, and then there's another library that was second in the number of downloads by a guy named G. Grames. Previously, I was using his, and now I've switched back over to what I'll call the standard Arduino LORA library. I did that because I actually ended up seemingly being able to get better performance out of it than the other. And by performance, I mean more packets at the moment. This is what my send and receive code looks like. I blasted through that. I didn't mean to do that. Come back to me. And so I basically just have a interval set at like 200 milliseconds, trying to get to 5 hertz, and it's going to change the state between send and receive if it exceeds that. But so far, I've been able to, just send a packet and then receive a packet using the LORA available function within the library. And so at the moment, it varies because I measure the number of messages that I'm getting. I'm getting between 3 hertz and 7. I got up to 6 or 7, 6.8, I think, at one point. So that's, I think I'm moving on, using this library, using this function, and we'll see how we do in the real world. So that's been a lot of what I did. So I got this code working. I was happy with the code. And then I'm like, instead of trying to copy this code back into my old code, I decided it was time to clean up the code. So I've now been adding things into this function, which is why I've got V3 on here. And the actual state I'm in now is trying to finish adding the rest of the code into my functions. So I think this is the tractor code. So the main loop on the tractor, there's a steer vehicle function, there's a control the transmission function, there's get data off the tractor, like voltage is the simplest thing to wrap your head around, to get that off and send it back to the radio control so I can visualize that if I need to. Get the serial data, which is a replacement for raw serial, which is, think of it as that's the function where command velocity is going to come in. And a function for transmitting and receiving LORA messages, display OLD data, and again, mostly for debugging. I've got a print info message function. So where I'm at the moment is to finish getting these copied over and working, and all of get it to compile cleanly from where I was. So then after that, well, let me just show you the serial data thing, because that's one of the more, well, that's a significant departure from using raw serial, is reading data coming in, and if it's a message type 1, that means it's command velocity data, and save that off. I haven't really finished out writing the other input types yet. And then I've got this Python script that sits on the laptop that listens for the command velocity and then, just shoves that up the serial command. Now I'm going to test this thread locking because I've got, in addition to sending it up, I'm also reading messages off of the serial port. So I don't know, I've never used serial lock for this process, so we'll see if that works for me or not. So at the moment, this is only subscribing to command velocity, and it's got two threads that it starts. One to read the speed parameters that I use for configuring the PIDs, or I'm sorry, configuring the transmission presets, I'll call them, and then also to read this serial port to get any messages that I've published on there. They're probably written to there is better than accurate. So where am I? I am updating my radio control firmware and my ESP32 firmware that runs on the tractor to use the different LORA library and to use, my homegrown serial data transfer process versus ROS serial. So hopefully that won't take more than another day or two to finish that off. Then I could be testing again. First, starting off with going all the way back to what the heck's make sure my steering is controlled and make sure my speed is controlled, and then I can start feeding it, pure pursuit missions again. That's where I'm at. Anything else for recording, Jeff? I think I'm good.
I don't think so.